Hi everybody. Once again, a very warm welcome to our Roots and Roots Adda today. And we are extremely delighted to have Dr. Maroona Murmu with us, who, of course, doesn't require a lot of introduction. But just as a formality, I would like to introduce Maroona to all of us. Dr. Maroona Murmu is a historian whose work bridges academic scholarship, public engagement, and social activism. She earned her PhD in history from Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi and is a professor in the Department of History at Jadavpur University, Kolkata. She has published quite widely in different edited volumes and journals associated with reputed presses like Orient Black Swan, Permanent Black, Primus Books. In 2020, she published her work, Words of Her Own Women Authors in 19th Century Bengal, which is a monograph and it was published with Oxford University Press. Her research expands across women's history, caste, very importantly, Adivasi questions, marginality in the politics of development. So once again, Maroona, a very warm welcome, and it's really very exciting to have you with us.
Thank you for having me here.
Um, I would like to start off uh, kind of a very generic question, and I would say a sort of an expansive question. Uh, Now, as an activist, as an academic activist, who on the one side, uh, have been reflecting on the questions of marginalized communities in terms of gender, in terms of caste, in terms of class, and most importantly, in terms of the Adivasi identity, because I'm very much aware that how consciously you identify yourself as an Adivasi professor. And you have been voicing it about it in terms of your writings, in terms of your classroom teachings, but at the same time, very actively in the public spaces as well, in terms of resistance against uh, the usual historical legacy that this country holds in terms of exploiting the higher caste, the privileged class of communities that have always lived with this legacy, this normative legacy of exploiting marginalized communities, especially the Adivasi communities in the country. You have voiced very vocally and you keep on voicing against that. But at the same time, there have been incidents where you have been a very violent target of these communities because you have voiced in terms of your, against the exploitation of these communities. And of course, it's very emotionally, culturally very hard and harsh to deal with it. So how do you, I mean, I know it's a sort of a complex question, but still I would like to listen from you that how do you deal or negotiate with this tension of being resilient, resistant on the one side, and at the same time being a target for being so boldly voicing out against the injustice and the dehumanization of the Adivasi community in Bengal.
Resistance has always been with me. Otherwise, I would have to give up my education in the first place because right from the age of 7, I have been uh, I won't say I didn't have the sense of being marginalized at that point in time, but I remember when I was in class two, my class teacher asked me to stand up and uh, answer whether I was a scheduled tribe. I didn't even know what ST is. So my brother studied in class four. I went to him and to his class, and he told me, "Yes, we are ST." That is all I understood. But that is the day when I realized that I am something that nobody in the classroom is. I am something other, the other of everybody in the classroom. So the thing is that my resilience was never an option. I had to be so. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come this far. And I would like to say that it has been a very, very difficult journey for me. Even now, I am under 14 medications for things that have been happening in the state. And I've been previously, because of trolling and all, I'd been off medicine for some time, but even then I had to take up medicines, psychiatric medicines. So the general question that West Bengal is casteless and the normal reporter. But the thing is that it is, since the ones who face such casteist discrimination are the ones who realize how fatal it can be for them. Uh, the mental trauma that one has to undergo cannot go unnoticed. And I do speak about mental health issues publicly because I know I have the means to go to psychiatrists, therapists, but people coming from my community do not have the means to do it. So it's like we face multiple discriminations.
Yeah, thank you, Maruna, for the response. And another reason, like while I was listening to you, I also wanted to add to that, that another reason why I started with this question of tension, because, um, of course, not in generally in every circumstances, but there are a lot of circumstances in which um, the whole act of, or the philosophy as well as the act of resistance and resilience is kind of romanticized, and where, I mean, that romanticization takes place at multi-scalar levels, of course, in audio forms and in visual forms, audiovisual forms, in terms of different other forms of narratives, and since we are talking about a lot of practical circumstances, we are going to talk about a lot of practical circumstances, and especially, I mean, when you were saying that for you, resistance was never, it was never an option. It was by default a necessity for you to survive and live through it. And I mean, in just a quick follow-up question, in terms of your response, how do you, when you engage, and as you said, you talk about mental health concerns, you have been undergoing a lot in terms of your mental health conditions, as you rightly mentioned. You also, in your process of resistance and solidarity, um, in fact, if I just borrow the term effective resistance from Sarah Ahmed, you also meet a lot of people around your communities, about the Adivasi communities, of course, other so-called marginalized communities who have their own forms and patterns of being marginalized across generations, but also you see the cross solidarities as well. Because I know you work also a lot very closely with the LGBTQIA plus communities. You work very closely with the transgender communities of Bengal, etc. Uh, of course, when you interact with them, you also visibly see the kind of trauma, the fear, the tensions, the anger that they undergo on an everyday basis. Um, how do you sort of engage with them, or try to push their boundaries of resistance, or in to add or to further elaborate, like how do you sort of see that to what extent one can resist and to what extent one cannot resist? How do you sort of motivate the people? How do you sort of push the people or bring them together in your space of resistance?
See, as I said, because of the ethnic identity that I am born into, I belong to the Santhal community, one of the 40 Adivasi communities in the state. So, see, this is an ontological question in the first place. Resistance, like Adivasi communities, their land is inseparable from, sorry, the Adivasi communities are inseparable from forest, river, customary rights, sacred landscape. Uh, they live because of their community identity. But in the entire discourse of development, they have been displaced from their, they keep being displaced from their own mm, place of being. So, being is very important for me, right from my childhood when I came to understand things around. So, I uh, truly believe in the concept of intersectionality and solidarity and allyship. So, any community which feels marginalized and is marginalized by the society, I try to they and the thing is that Adivasis, I am a part of them, but others, they have actually extended their solidarity towards me and have accepted me as one amongst them. So that is the reason why I can, or I think some of my friends, they say, this is something I would like to say. Soni Sori once told me that she identifies with me because we come from the Adivasi community. And from the transgender LGBTQI community, I've heard that uh, they feel comfortable with me because I come from a marginal background. So, thanks for naming your talk. Actually, it's marginality which brings us together. And all of us have mental traumas of various kinds, and uh, we feel comfortable in each other's presence and do discuss social discrimination at various levels. Yeah.
Um, Now I was wondering to sort of go towards a direction. And of course, I mean, for others, in case you have questions, anything you want to share, feel free to put in the chat box or you can raise your hand. We can unmute and speak. So meanwhile, as you're all thinking, I was wondering, Maruna, to sort of now put our, like, sort of direct our conversation towards a more um specific, towards a more about our contemporary socio-political circumstances, especially to be very direct and specific, what is happening under the fascist regime, not just in Bengal, but across other parts of India. One of the very interesting, and since you brought this idea, I mean, you brought this narrative of ontological perspective, it also ties to that. One thing that we've seen with the emergence of the current fascist regime was one of the many things that brought them into power in terms of their narratives, or let's say selling their narratives, was the publicization of the idea of decoloniality. I mean, of course, I mean, decoloniality has been in our discourse, like across the globe, in our respective contexts and perspectives. Uh, of course, for a long period of time, rightfully because of our colonial past. But what we mostly see is it has been the usage of the term, the implementation of the term, bringing the term into our conversation has mostly been restricted within a very academic circle, within a very academic, so called intellectual, so called gate-kept space, mostly talking in conferences, through curriculums in the classroom, through lectures, through publications, in a very formal space. It was not a part of a regular conversation, let's say in the cafeteria or in the roadside tea stalls or while walking around the footpaths, which was kind of brought into that public space when this government came. And I mean, their selling point was like, well, we are still recycling the colonial ideologies in terms of education, in terms of curriculum, in terms of scholarship recognition, etc., etc., and so we need to decolonize. And one of the essential subtools of decolonization was what they projected as the recognition, the rightful recognition of the indigenous communities across the country, the Adivasi communities across the country, and which we see, at least. And of course, I mean, I am a community outsider, so I'm commenting, I want to acknowledge the fact here that I'm commenting from a community outsider, but whatever little bit of my common sense tells me is that a lot of these initiatives, that what they say as a indigenous community recognition or Adivasi recognition, is deeply tokenistic in nature, has to do a lot with the vote banks, whether they are rewarding them in terms of whatever national awards they have, whether they are being rewarded in terms of political positions, whether they are being rewarded in terms of scholarships or educational scholarships, etc. But they're vastly tokenistic in nature and has to do a lot with the vote bank politics, which in fact the previous political entities have also done in a similar way. Now, and since you are somebody who closely works with communities, consistently interacts with them, share each other's concerns and challenges, tensions and anger, my point here is like my question to here is like, to what extent do you think that these sort of tokenistic initiatives that are being undertaken in the name of nationalism, in the name of indigenous recognition, in the name of decoloniality currently in the country under all of these questionable umbrellas, to what extent it is disrupting the community further? I mean, if it, I mean, across Bengal or across the country, to what further damage it is causing, I mean, to this particular community.
Yeah, thanks for uh, posing this question. See, in the name of decoloniality, they are celebrating Adivasi dance, they are promoting Adivasi handicraft, they are commodifying Adivasi food, they are appropriating Adivasi medicinal knowledge uh, for Adivasi festivals. For some of them, they are also declaring them to be national holidays. But when it comes to its tokenism so far as political rights are concerned, because when it comes to Adivasi land claim, that is contested. Adivasi forest, which is a part of Adivasi livelihood and ecological balance, that is extracted, and Adivasi displacement is rationalized as developmental necessity. So this is absolutely, I do not think that there is a paradox there. You cannot celebrate only things which bring about a market for yourself, and try to deny their rights, making them all the more vulnerable, because Adivasi knowledge system is a dynamic system of intellectual, ecological, social practice. So if you displace them, you are changing their interaction with forest, agriculture, migration, climate technology, everything. So you're taking away their entire life world. So I do not think this is any sort of decoloniality. Putting one or two token heads does not do anything, because you are talking about a Forest Rights Act that is taking away their land rights. Uh, in the name of Indian knowledge system, you are actually promoting a Sanskrit sort of a model of one knowledge system. Uh, you are not. There are representation in the parliamentary system, but they are hardly given any voice in the decision making. Uh, so and let's set the better of the economic autonomy. They are the poorest of the poor. So this is a hogwash, I think, the entire question of decoloniality.
And most importantly, like especially when you are talking about land rights and in terms of the other forms of accessibility, in terms of the acknowledgement of the knowledge system, if we look at the like one of the many directions of the economic strategy of this fascist government, extermination of lands, seizing lands from the indigenous communities, and handing it over to the corporate giants have been one of the
Absolutely.
basic foundation of the so-called development model of this country.
Mhm.
And we can see across India, it has been happening where, and there is hardly a media coverage, and we know for obvious reasons. We don't want to get into that conversation right now, how the media houses have got sold to them, etc. But the thing is, like, the point we are talking about is where, and that is the paradox that you see, where you clearly, the tokenism gets very clearly exposed. Now, taking this perspective of the question of solidarity that we have been speaking, and in one of your like just some time back in one of your responses, you mentioned that how not just the Adivasi community people, but also people from LGBTQIA plus communities, transgender communities, uh, because they see there is an experience, consistent experience of um, marginalization and dehumanization of these communities across generations through their state of consistent being abused and being marginalized. They see a way of building solidarity, uh, and avenues of solidarity with what you do with the Adivasi community, and also widely with the gender marginalization as well. So, Maroona, I was wondering, will you mind sharing with us that the sort of intersections that you see between the different marginalized communities that you work, which of course they are very different, but still, how do you build that solidarity together? How do you see those cross connections and the intersections, and what impact so far it had in your ways of, building those resistance against the abusive superiority of the different castes and communities?
Yeah, let me begin with uh, okay, I would now identify as that moment as very crucial for my development as what I am today. That is when I was choosing my topic for PhD in JNU. So I have been trained for 15 years in musical forms, singing specifically of various types. And then my chairperson said that I wanted to work on Vishnupur Gharana, which is one of the indigenous Gharana of Bengal. So my chairperson said that being a tribal, you want to work on high culture, you're not even an insider. So I dropped that research theme then. And then I went on to work about the Bhatra Mohila writers, as I say. But then, if you look at the literature, they might have produced more than 300 books in 19th century. But if you look at the doings of so-called Bengal Renaissance, like Rabindranath Tagore, or say Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, they were very derisive about women writers. So I tried to, amongst the, what would I say, the privileged, I then found out the marginal, and the gender question became a part of my research area. So it began there as an academic exercise, and then, as I said, that when I came back to Bengal, there was a lot of what would I say, political upheaval here during the Singur Nondigram time. So I had not completed my PhD then, but during the time, such things were happening. So I became part of uh, a group called Teachers and Scientists Against Maldevelopment. And this is also uh, how I see the development project in India. Like it's like you displace the Adivasis and you call it development, nation building, and whatnot. So it's maldevelopment according to me. But this was mainstream intellectuals in West Bengal. They were doing it. So over the years, I so these were basically, they were, then I became, later I became a convener, Forum Against Monopolistic Aggression. This was against corporate aggression, because most of the places where there is displacement, there is the corporate markets doing it here in Calcutta and in other places, the tribal areas, Orissa, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh. So, so and then uh, when during the Hokarov movement in Jadavpur University, that is when I found a lot of solidarity. Like the solid, I came across people who stood by Jadavpur University, and these were all, many of them were from LGBTQIA plus communities. So it's like that is how I so it is through my activism of various sorts that I came to have bonds with people, even at the national level, feminist alliances with transgender individuals. So that is how things went.
Um, this incident, um, that you shared with respect to your choosing your PhD topic at JNU, is kind of, pushing me to a broader philosophical question. And that is, and I think this question has been asked at multiple levels, but still I think it holds a lot of relevance in terms of the conversation that we are having. On the one side, there has always been a history of denials, of acknowledging the knowledge systems of the Adivasis, the cultures of the Adivasis. And to the extent, and it has always been, I mean, even if you're looking even beyond politics, if you're trying to look into our cultures, it has always been there. The word wildness have been by default since we are born as a child. The society teaches us the word wildness, the word being uncultured, the word being uncivilized has to do by default with the Adivasis. In Bengali, as a child, I have heard people saying, the people in the school, the friends in the school, or people in other places, in জংলি আদিবাসীদের মতো ব্যবহার করছিস কেন?
Mhm.
A very common sentence in the Bengali language. For those who are, here not very familiar with the Bengali language, just a rough translation of this statement I would like to share, that why are you behaving like wild Adivasis? A common statement, if to sort of denote that you are not behaving in a civilized, respectful way. Now, so there is always a sort of hatred that is entrenched in our language, in our grammar, in our cultures, in our perspectives, in our policies across generations, across time, to the extent where we have even forgotten to question them. On the other side, there is always a fear of them. Now, the question is, if Adivasi communities, and it kind of, this question I would say apply for any other marginalized communities as well, if they are not of any worth, if they are absolutely deniable, if they are absolutely trashable, they're just discardable entities. So why the so-called high caste, mainstream, privileged communities always have to be so bothered about them? When it comes to tokenism, they of course need these communities. As you were rightly mentioning, in terms of dance, in terms of music, we still across Bengal, across India, we have these fairs where they would be requested, they would be sort of invited to dance in a particular way, so that the acrobatics, so that their representations match with the preconditioned ideas or imaginations of the people of how a Adivasi appears to be. We know what happens in these so-called eco resorts near these forest areas, which used to be once a foothold of the Adivasi communities. They have been displaced. Now they are being converted into museum artifacts, being projected in a specific way that satisfies the audience. Their denialism has always been there. They're being not represented, they're being treated as discardable entities, have always been there. But on the other side, It is this privileged communities, entities, institutions, they also need to keep on repeating, recycling the discardability of these indigenous communities to frame their policies of development, to frame their policies of progress, to claim their vote banks, to claim their justifications of their pseudo ideologies of democracy. Now, I know, Maruna, that you also your law, quite a bit of your work and current. Correct me, please, if I'm wrong. Is also very much premised when it comes to political ideologies. It's very much premised in the idealism of Marxism in general. I mean, there are of course many other strands, which very well intersects with your Adivasi identity, your work with mobilizing the margins, etc. Now, with respect to this premise, why this paradox has to be consistently generated, consistently produced and reproduced by the privileged, so called self labeled, privileged, educated uh, Babu class communities and cultures in order to in for their survival, for the justification of this superiority. Why this paradox they have to live with, if the communities they keep on discarding are discardable, are absolutely discardable in nature?
Yeah, that is because of the resilience, I think. Because, see, you cannot deny the fact that before the revolt of 1857, we have Adivasis rising in rebellion, the Santhal rebellion of 1855, and even before that, you have Tilka Machi. So it's like we have always been resilient. We always wanted sovereignty of our own. So it's like in the entire discourse of development, uh, there was a certain play of language to uh, what would I say, invisibilize us. Like dams were called temple of modern India, railway as evidence of civilization, mining as economic growth, industrialization as national progress. And development was packaged in a way as if displacement is reasonable, necessary, morally desirable. So, right from the colonial times, like who needed land for railways, canals, forestry, to the post colonial times on the discourse of national development, national nation building, to the neoliberal times when you have corporate resource extraction uh, s- supported by the state government. So it's like you cannot do away with us because you see our lands, forests, rivers, animals, sacred sites as a resource community that is to be extracted. We are not as if we are not human beings, but objects for collateral damages for development, as I call them. So it's like uh, you celebrate our food, dance, music, everything is okay. But the moment there is a question of quote unquote development, you think us to be an obstacle. So you have to demonize us. You have to tell us that through development, quote unquote, through development, you are going to reach a higher your poverty index is going to be lower, you'll be in a better economic position. So the only way you can do it is to tell us that we are forever the inferior and we need the support of the state of whichever nature, pre-colonial, colonial, uh, post-colonial. So we are forever in support and we need liberators. So for that, you need to somehow say that we are what uncivilized, jongli. Even when I go for talks, and at the end of the talks, I find people coming in to say that. In classrooms, students face that sort of a discrimination from fellow mates, uh, one of the students, his parent came in to tell me that he was says that levels of civilization was taught in the class, and he was identified as primitive. The moment the word primitive was spoken in the class, everybody started smiling, laughing, looking at him. So this is how the general idea has been. The society has actually keeps on validating those, I don't know what sort of barbaric notions and concepts which have been there for time immemorial. There's no modernity so far as, quote unquote, modernity so far as thinking on those lines are concerned. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And while you were, talking about like why this paradox always need to exist, where why these tokenisms and stereotypes need to be and abuses need to be normatively produced and reproduced by the so-called mainstream privileged communities. I was also simultaneously thinking, like in terms of at least on pen and paper, I'm talking about in terms of um, transitions in law, like transformations in law and order, in bringing articles and sub articles in the law books to sort of represent how the law is changing towards being more accommodative and acknowledgeable of the indigenous past of the country. In terms of reservation system also serves as one of those justifications of accommodating the indigenous communities of the country. Job reservations, educational study reservations, scholarships in terms of financial assistances and scholarships, and so on and so forth. However, of course, I don't have specific statistics and percentages to flesh out right now, but one thing that I can for surely, reflect on is things for sure has not improved. With time, things have declined to a vast extent. In certain segments, it might have improved, but in certain segments, it have declined, especially when it comes to the practical application, the everyday application of these transformations and the transitions that we see as transformations in law and order and pen and paper and the policy books. Now, my question is, of course, I understand one thing is there are a lot of institutional failures. There are failures in terms, there is a conscious way of just putting them as eye-washing tactics and doesn't not having any conscious intention to apply them. But simultaneously, I also feel that if we are talking at all of the possible transformations and transitions, it has to come with our problematic mindsets that we have been living with across generations, across time. And that has to, even before we talk about political policy making, institutional policy making, the bigger stuffs, we need to somewhere somewhat start with these transformations, transitions within ourselves, in our surroundings, in our society, the way we treat people, the way we approach people. Because there have been, like, I have seen them personally, and I have known people experiencing this within residential communities, what, like children playing with each other, parents intermingling with each other in schools, when it comes to attending community events like birthdays and marriages and other forms of community events, what kind of people go to which kind of people, mingle with what kind of people. When we look at this everyday circumstances, who wish to sit beside whom on a school bus or a office bus, etc., there is always in a lot of circumstances, I'm not saying every circumstance, in a lot of circumstances where these sort of already problematically entrenched class fractions, caste hierarchies, communal hierarchies are played out very confidently, subtly, and in a celebrative way. Now, as again, because you work with so many roots altogether within your space of activism, to what extent do you see this changes happening? Because you're interacting with so many people in so many spaces on an everyday basis. To what extent do you see this changes happening? Do you see this changes happening at all? If it is happening at a minimal level, it is happening in a customized way, it is happening. What do you see there at this grassroots level?
Now, see, let me tell one. I'll see it as a story as of now because I'm working there. See, the first uh, so-called Naya Daur began with Nehru opening the Panchit Dam, DVC, and we have an Adivasi girl, Budni Mejan, on the papers. We see her uh, pushing the button of the Panchit Dam. We do not go on to see what happened to this Budni Mejan. She was thrown out of the job after a few days, and then she was thrown out by the community because it was thought that since Nehru had garlanded her, uh, she had garlanded him first, and out of affection, Nehru garlanded her back. So she was called Nehru's tribal wife, and she was excommunicated. I've met the neighbors of Budni Mejan a year back, and since she was displaced, she went to Rajiv Gandhi after he became the prime minister, saying that you're as the same woman, and Rajiv Gandhi tried to reinforce her. Now, I went there last year working at the Panchit Dam site, and there are protesters sitting till now, since November last month. They're sitting out there saying that they have not been given their compensation for displacement. Let me remind you, 40,000 acres of land was taken away for DVC, and they did not get their compensation. And now the government has decided, DVC has decided to sell the majority of its share to another floating solar project. The thing is that these displaced Adivasis, they have formed a fisher community. Now, because of these floating solar panels, they are losing their livelihood once again, and they're still fighting. So, what has changed from this is 1950s to I'll be going day after tomorrow there again to see what is happening. Even in Purulia, there's a Turga thermal power, sorry, hydroelectric power project. Over there, there are 11 Adivasi villages which are at a threat of being submerged, like Sardar Sarovar. And here also, if you even see the case of Sardar Sarovar, since people know of it, I'm not talking about the other ones that you do not know. 57 amongst the people who were displaced, 57.6% were Adivasis. So, what development has the government done for the Adivasis? You do not, like, representation cannot substitute the what would I say, the life world of the Adivasis. Now, and there needs to be a question as to who defines what development is, who benefits from it, and who gets to pay the social and ecological costs of it. So the thing is that we bear the burden of disproportionate loss when it's a development for you. So socially, because of the trolling incident that happened a few years back, and there have been number of teachers, college teachers, Papia Mandi, and others who have faced discrimination even though they are teaching as college professors. So I too had to face the trolling, and I'm fighting. I being so privileged now with the money that I have and social contacts that I've developed, uh, I have been fighting this case for the last 6 years. Imagine Adivasis who are barely literate. So in Purulia, only 30% of women are Adivasi women are educated. So 70% till now are uneducated. Suppose something like that happens. You have a SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act. So would they be able to uh, file such a case? It is not enough to have rules and regulations, but you have to have the means so that they can access. It's not the question of availability alone, it's accessibility. So that's absolutely not there. Economic, social, they do not have any sort of capital, political, cultural, social, economical, no capital to fight back. Even if they have the, what would I say, on paper, you have things to protect them.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody, I've been doing a lot of talking, so I just don't want to, uh, you know, take up the whole space. But yes, if anybody have any questions, anything to share, of course, any comments, feel free to unmute yourself and share, or you can put it in the chat box, whatever makes you feel comfortable. Um, yeah, and as you do that, and also just to let all of us know that, you know, we are almost coming to the end of this really fascinating conversation, which for sure we don't want to end, but we are all bounded by time. So, while everybody else is maybe thinking and just registering what we are talking around, uh, I was wondering, Maruna, to ask you, as we have been talking about rights and responsibilities and resistance and of what is happening in terms of accessibility, education. There is so much of, in general, I mean, apart from the IKS Indian knowledge system, there is so much of generally talks about traditional ecological knowledge systems, TEK, which we have widely imbibed from those European, Euro North American structures of, you know, of sort of identifying and recognizing traditional knowledges. And we do talk about lot about these within our classrooms. Nowadays, I'm sure you're very well aware of these very a splash of disciplines that have come into the conversation. While we're talking about climate change and environment, we are talking about environmental humanities. We are talking about critical waste studies. We are talking about, a sort of, and it's been there in the conversation where we associate gender, sexuality, and environment as intersections. Of course, UN SDGs have always been there as a part of conversation. There is a lot of simultaneous narratives that we goes on and in pen and paper in terms of curriculum structuring, in terms of introducing new courses, diploma courses, master's courses, PhD courses, or any other forms of paper based formal courses. We are talking about a lot about indigenous knowledge systems, recognizing them, the kind of sufferings they are still engaging, like said, they are still experiencing so far. But when it comes to pedagogy, now comes the process of teaching and learning and thought sharing and co-caring and co-sharing that has always been a part of the indigenous knowledge systems of the communities across the world, whether they are based in the Australia New Zealand border, whether they are based in the whether they are based in Purulia, whether they are based in the US Canada border, or whether they are based in different parts of the African continent, wherever they are based in, one common link that we always see within indigenous communities is co-caring, reciprocity, co-sharing, and most importantly, acknowledging the more than human knowledge systems, like talking to the trees, talking to the spirit, interacting with birds, interacting with various other living forms in nature. Now, we have been reading a lot about these things. We are aware of it. This community does that, that community does that. But when it comes to the pedagogical, practical part, still that doesn't fit into the these sort of narratives. We are talking about climate change, we are talking about environmental sustainability, but when it comes to the pedagogical perspective, this still remains alien. This still remains as objects to be referenced, to be footnoted, to be endnoted, to be fancifully, charted out in the research papers, etc. Why do you think so still there is a lack of this realization of the pedagogical transition, the pedagogical transformation? Because if this is not happening, really nothing much is happening. We can already see that. We still continue to remain in that gyre, consistently inventing new disciplines. That's it.
Yeah, true. Once again, the difference between epistemological and the ontological. Yeah, so talking of narratives, like when I visited this Durga power, those affected villages. So one of the villages, my one of the respondents, he took me to a village we consider as Adiva Santals, we consider the hills, other indigenous communities as well, we consider the hills to be our god. And then he told us about the fact that if the Durga hydropower project comes into operation, then the Marangburu place of the sacred grove and the Marangburu place of what do I say? Propitiation, these are going to go down the water. And so what's going to happen? And as you said, that we have a very intimate relationship. We are being animistic. We have a very intimate relationship with nature. Now, these might seem to be, these are our everyday practices, but these so-called scientificity, so-called what would I say, modernity, such terms cannot accommodate these sort of beliefs. But they would invent, in the name of Indian knowledge system, they would have no problem inventing some Boeing 707 in Mahabharata, and they don't have a problem with all that. But the ontological practices of a community is not acceptable. So they are that's more attempt to invisibilize such customs. Uh, so, as I said, that they would appropriate all that they can incorporate within their knowledge system, uh, render a performative recognition towards it, but they are not going to give any sort of epistemic sovereignty to uh, the community members. Like, uh, I would say that rather than uh, romanticize our practices as part of folklore, we should the uh, syllabi in the textbooks, they should try to understand the living knowledge system that is there. So rather than extracting our Jal, Jungle, and Zameen as a resource for your development, you should actually allow us ecological justice. So rather than speaking about the Adivasis in the text, you should enable the Adivasis to speak for themselves. It's not that we remain informants about indigenous culture, but allow us to be producers of knowledge of about our own living world. Otherwise, it's nothing beyond contemporary tokenism. So, if quote unquote dominant knowledge system doesn't see us as humans with our own beliefs, uh, own ecological understanding, this just putting one or two topics on Birsa Munda or Sidhu Murmu, Kano Murmu would do no good. Like I've been teaching for so long, that hasn't brought about any change, actually.
Thank you so much, Maruna, for your great reflections. And I have got finally a reason to not ask more questions because we have a comment in the chat box. Let me read it out for you. I think it's actually a question. Sahin from the Central University of Tamil Nadu asks, isn't the current regime pushing the tribal or any other indigenous knowledge and practices to the margin by providing a space to a particular narrative which is centered in or around the dominating spheres?
Absolutely. This Indian knowledge system is actually Hindu knowledge system that they are trying to promote, and these are mostly from Sanskrit texts. And so the problem is that if you read their Sanskrit text, Manusmriti, you do not allow the lower castes and women to have the right to education in the first place. So, how would you accommodate these people in your knowledge system? So, it is exclusive right from the beginning, and Indian has, we have during the, it's not so ancient or pre modern, we have after that rulers who have not been quote unquote Indian in their understanding and who have given birth to administration, administrative laws, which we still follow, and revenue systems. So those knowledge systems are not acknowledged. So, yes, with not only the indigenous knowledge system and practices, anything that is not uh, Sanskritic, not Hindu, is not considered to be uh, what would I say, acceptable knowledge and practice.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody would like to share something or have any question for Maruna. Uh, we can spare another 5 minutes. Um,
I
but
have a
anyways,
question for Doctor.
yeah, yeah, sure, sure, Ananya.
So, Dr. Murmu spoke about the dynamic knowledge systems. I am wondering how these indigenous knowledge systems, how can they stay in the dynamic way that they exist when brought inside the structures of the university, which is, which already has problematic structural flaws.
Yeah. So, so far as the syllabi is concerned, and thanks to the university that I teach in, we have a single unitary system. We don't have colleges under us, so we can frame our own syllabus. So I offer a seminar paper called Dalits, Adivasis, and Women. Uh, in colonial India. So, and when I teach, I try to talk about the marginals, like the modern India people that I teach. I begin with the Santhal rebellion. So, I try to put in whatever little we get to know about the tribals and the Dalits from history, very little, but whatever little I have learned, I try to introduce them to the students so that they have a new knowledge frontier.
All right, and we have also a question in the chat box by Pallavi Chakraborty. Could you reflect on what is happening with the NCRT engagements with IKS?
See, I am not very updated about the NCRT engagements, but I do know for sure that the NEP 2020, New Education Policy 2020 for colleges and universities, they have introduced something called Indian knowledge system, and which I feel, as I said, is problematic because there is no one Indian and there is no one system. So universities are spaces where we talk about dialogues, discussions, and dissents as well. So knowledge systems have been in constant dialogues with each other. So there has been no one system as such. So one nation, one vote, and one voice sort of ideology has been thrust on the syllabi as well, which is problematic. So I think they're doing the same thing with NCRT because they are deleting certain periods of history from the history from the textbooks. As I said, it's all something which is not Hindu is not Indian according to their understanding. So it's like anything to do with uh, which are non-Sanskritic, not Hindu, is invisibilized in the textbooks.
Exactly. And also like to add on to that, not just about not Hindu, but also the worst thing is the Hindutva, which
Hmm.
is a even that's a worse than that because the distortion of
Yeah,
the existing even if we take the Hindu narratives, which is again a very complex, I mean, I don't know if it is even a right term to use Hindu narratives, considering the fact that as a religion, it's itself as
it's
an
a,
ideology, as a philosophy, it's so diverse and complex and multi-layered and contested. But still, if we take this kind of word where even the distortion of what they refer to is also what is making the situations worse. That is why if you look at the so-called manifesto that we have that they have structured for the IKS, which is very much available online for free, we can all access that. Nowhere they have ever mentioned anything concretely about valuing, about understanding the indigenous knowledge, cultures, and traditions of the country. So I think we will conclude with this, and of course there is a lot to talk about. It was a wonderful, of course, wonderful in the sense quite unsettling, moving, but of course very thought-provoking uh, to listen to. Maruna, for your wonderful reflections, for sharing your experiences, which are, of course, never easy to share on the public platform. And it's actually, I know it's going to sort of create a lot of future conversations, and I'm sure we will be having once again a wonderful opportunity to have you once again with us for not one, but many follow-up conversations. So, till then, all of you, please take care, stay
and
well.
I
Yes,
especially
sure.
want to thank you for correcting me. It's like Hinduism is a way of life in India. So thank you for correcting and saying that Hindutva is very different from Hinduism as a way of life, which is a combination of various ideas, philosophies. True. Thank you for
No, no,
that.
I mean, it was not actually a correction. I just wanted to have a continuity of
Well,
that. I mean, you were very
absolutely.
much right when you pointed about, because you were also very clear and specific about the Sanskritic and the non-Sanskritic part. And this is where I thought that bringing in the idea of Hindutva also makes sense because this distinction of the Sanskritic and non-Sanskritic is one of the many problematic problematic binaries, of course, illogical, unscientific binaries that have been generated by Hindutva. So I just thought of adding into that. So, anyways, let us take care. We are all living in
Yeah.
extremely, tough times altogether. in whichever parts of the country and the world we are in. So this is in solidarity with each one of us. Let us take care, stay well, and let us live with and through each other in these extremely tumultuous times. So have a nice rest of the morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are.
Thank you so much.